Finding common ground for advocates from education, business, and policy to come together to build a brighter future for students and the economy sounds like a tall order. But you'll hear from Scott LaBand how he and his team at Colorado Succeeds, through their strong core values and leadership abilities, are having an impact doing just that on this episode of Making Our World Better.
Welcome to the Making Our World Better podcast, where you will find motivation and encouragement through lively conversations with inspirational people who every day are making our world a better place. Now, here's your host, Jay Clark.
Welcome to the podcast. I am Jay Clark, and I'm excited to share a conversation with Scott LaBand, president of Colorado Succeeds. Scott's been with the organization since 2010 and is on a mission to unlock opportunity for all young people and make Colorado the best place in America to raise a child and grow a business. Can't wait to hear more. Prior to Colorado Succeeds, Scott worked as the legislative director for Colorado Senator Mike Johnston, where he oversaw the policy agenda and served as the point person for both internal strategy negotiations with other Colorado state legislatures and external relations and coalition building with advocates and interest groups. Wow. Scott began his career in business as an associate at HVS International and went on to a leadership role with the Qdoba Restaurant Corporation. He's a founding board member of Rocky Mountain Prep, a charter management organization with 3 high-performing public schools in Denver and Aurora. Awesome. Scott graduated from the University of Colorado at Boulder with a degree in business administration and earned a master's degree in education, leadership, and organizational change from the University of Denver. Most importantly, Scott and his wife are parents to 3 children. Scott, thanks so much for being here today.
It's a real pleasure, Jay. Thanks so much for your time.
Awesome. Well, start off simple. Tell me how you would describe Colorado Succeeds to somebody that doesn't know anything about it.
You know, the easiest way to think about Colorado Succeeds is actually like a chamber of commerce that only focuses in on education and workforce development. And so we're a group of businesses from around the state. It's one network. We are exclusively nonprofit and nonpartisan, but we try to bring the business voice together to say, how can we roll up our sleeves and be a partner to educators, to leaders in government, to leaders across post-secondary education? Just where can we fit in and create value for young people today? Because we know it's our future talent pipeline.
Well, and I love the prediction on your website that says 85% of the jobs available in 2030 have not even been invented yet. So tell us about your Vision 2030 plan.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite broad in the sense that, you know what, we've gotten out of the business of trying to predict the future. I think anybody in business would agree.
That's true.
You know, like between a pandemic or monkeypox or
right.
a war in other parts of the world, that there's just too many unknowns.
Right.
And so instead of trying to predict the future and what's going to happen, what we need are really close feedback loops so that industry is at the table with education leaders, having dynamic conversations about the changes in real time. And so the big picture is, how do we put the student at the center, the learner, and create a system that responds to their unique needs and interests, rather than asking that learner to conform to the constraints of the system? And so trying to make it more learner-focused rather than institution-focused.
Wow.
And more connected to the real world so that we can finally answer that age-old question for young people today of, why am I learning this? And will I ever apply this in my life?
Right. Right. So, I mean, you see national trends, you're looking at that stuff all the time. How important is it for Colorado from a competitive standpoint, to tie all this stuff together, business and education?
So we often say that there's a moral imperative to do this work, which is clearly
true.
How do we help make sure that the next generation has the same opportunities that many of us in our generation have?
Right.
And for those of us who have some degree of power and influence, how can we use that for good to make sure that the next generation is set up well? So that's the moral imperative. The economic imperative, though, is that this is real impact on our state's GDP. And we've run studies that show that if you looked at the Colorado and said, if every young person today was able to go and get the education that they needed to be relevant in the labor market,
right,
the economic impact of that would be larger than our state's craft brew industry.
Isn't that something?
Slightly smaller than our state's ski industry. And so real potential here in terms of what this could mean for unlocking human potential of individuals, as well as our business climate in our state. And the better we can do that, the more likely we can recruit companies to relocate their headquarters to Colorado.
Right.
And the more likely we can keep the companies who are here in Colorado. Because right now, as you know, it's a war for talent out there, and there's other states who are very aggressively targeting Colorado companies and trying to get them to leave our borders. And that's not going to be a helpful thing for anybody in Colorado.
Right. So, I mean, you've got a lot of members in the organization. I mean, is it pretty much a straight line between a strong education system being good for business? I mean, the impact that's pretty much a straight line, right?
It is. You know, that's our tagline is great schools are good business, but we also know that great schools make great communities. And great schools mean that, you know, the employees of companies are able to send their kids to schools that they have confidence in, that they're going to be successful at. And it means that the talent pipeline is ready and equipped in Colorado to meet the demands for growth. And, you know, I'm sure you've heard we're a state that imports a lot of talent. And what would it look like to grow our own in a homegrown way, as opposed to being reliant on the fact that, you know, we have this beautiful mountains and geography and a recreational industry and a lot of things that people come to Colorado for. But it'd be nice to not be reliant on that for filling the talent gaps in our state's labor market. Right.
So I think I'd love to hear a little bit more about your three pillars, the policy, the philanthropy, and the practice. So starting with policy, you know, in an environment that feels more divided all the time, I mean, how do you bring government leaders, state leaders, business leaders all together to advocate for policy in education?
You know, first off, it's recognizing that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so
that's a
you
great
gotta have
line.
a seat at the table.
Writing that one down.
Business has to be represented at that table. You know, we are the employers of where many of these young people will end up going. And, you know, most people will work at some point in their life. And so it's likely that we've got an opportunity for them in the labor market. Number two, it's about making sure that we bring broad and diverse coalitions of people together.
Right.
And so education, workforce development to me feels like one of those areas that remains in our public policy debate that can be nonpartisan. You know, as you talked about, there's so much rancor and so many other political discussions these days. I'm not to suggest that education is immune from that. Certainly there are some, but we do find lots of area of common ground. And that looks like bringing together a lot of different groups of people to just have that conversation. What are the biggest challenges our state's facing? What are the potential solutions to achieving that? And really authentically engaging with learners, families, educators, and business leaders at every step of the way around how can we collaborate on that. And Jay, one thing I would just say is the more localized we get, the better those conversations become.
It's true.
I think when we try to do all of this at a state level, sometimes it's hard for people to understand what's in it for them. But we get down into the nitty gritty of what does this look like in your community, in your cities, and how can we work together to build extraordinary experiences for young people? That's what gets people really pumped up and excited. And then how do we scale that? That's what policy's for.
Yeah, because it's got to be interesting, because just like you're saying, what's going to be strong in one community, another community is going to have completely different issues.
It's all contextually based. And so we don't want to pretend that there's a right way to do this or something that we can just hit copy and paste. We really want to understand the unique nuances of what matters to that community. And then how do we respond to that? And one of the ways that we've been doing that is working with communities, with learners, families, educators, and business leaders to define a profile of a graduate. And what we mean by that is like, what do we want all high school graduates to know and be able to do when they leave the 12th grade? And what are those professional competencies, entrepreneurial competencies, academic competencies, civic competencies that really make for a well-rounded person? And then how do we really articulate those in a way that creates a unifying vision for that whole community to get behind?
Which is awesome, because this kind of cascades down the whole system as far as this could be informing academic decisions and pathway decisions and everything else for districts all across the state, right?
Exactly. We have a very local control environment in Colorado. And so it necessitates a degree to say the people who are closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. So what is it that you are seeing, and how do we help support you, not tell you what to do, but how do we help support, whether that's as a convener or a facilitator or sharing what we're learning from other parts of the state or other parts of the country to inspire you to think bigger than maybe you have before. Because that's also a big component of this is, people can't be what they can't see. And so sometimes you got to have to drop in a little bit of inspiration and take them someplace and wow them and say, oh, like that's possible for kids in that part of the state. Well, we don't want our kids to get left behind. How do we build that in our community as well?
That's awesome. So talk to me a little bit about as far as some of the programs that you guys run and spearhead for groups to take part in.
Yeah. And some of it is kind of like where I started to bridge into this conversation of let's take some business practices and business principles.
Sure.
Like, put the student first. Business, we believe in putting the customer first. In education, let's put the student first.
Right.
Let's talk about how we create opportunities for choice and innovation, accountability, transparency, return on investment, and agility. These are all principles that we try to bring to the conversation first and foremost. And to your earlier conversation, that's how we're able to unite people who might have very differing political views, is because when they put on this filter of what's best for young people and learners today, it might change how they would otherwise show up to that conversation. So number one, it's getting people at the table ready to have that conversation and being open to thinking differently than maybe they have in the past.
Right.
Then it's really about, how do we help business show up and be a good partner to schools? Mm-hmm. Business doesn't have time. They're in the world of trying to turn a profit. And so how can we support them and build capacity so that it's very plug and play? It's a little bit turnkey where we can say, these are the things that we know work when it comes to engaging with a school district. We want to help coach you on those things so that when you show up, you can have maximum return on investment of your time. And we try to tee up high value, high leverage opportunities that are very efficient and low time. And then on the same side, on the school side, trying to go to them and say, okay, you got one crack to talk to business. Let's get all of our things lined up. And let's start talking in a business language. What are your goals? What are your objectives? What are your key results? How are you going to measure these things? And then how can they be a key partner to you? And so to some extent, we're a little bit of an intermediary and a negotiator, translator that try to bring two different groups together who otherwise speak different languages and just operate in very different ways.
Well, and your organization's been around for a while, obviously doing a lot of great stuff. And tell me, is part of the secret sauce is it sounds like one of your real strengths is meeting people where they're at and understanding where people are. So you can say, hey, I know where you're at and I can connect you. So you know where people are and then you're able to connect them.
Exactly. It's a continuum, and there's no right or wrong place to be on that continuum, but it is understanding where is it their current state and what's their future state and how can we be a supportive partner, whether it's around continuous improvement or design thinking, user-based design, around communications and marketing, branding, fundraising, to get them from their current state to their desired future state. Wow. And it all starts with just getting people together. And that's what's been amazing to me is, coming out of the pandemic, I think there's a hunger and a desire to do more in person, to be more collaborative, to find that togetherness. And so I'm seeing a ton of momentum across the state right now.
Fantastic. And then from a philanthropic standpoint, you guys are not only doing all this connecting and lifting up and creating programs, but you're actually reinvesting back into some of the people that you work with.
That's exactly right. The business community is here to say we want to bring our expertise and our experience, but also our capital to make an impact. And so what we do is we run a process every year where we try to identify entrepreneurs within the education space. Could be an individual teacher, it could be a parent, a family, a learner, it could be an administrator. We leave that definition wide open to someone who has a great idea that we think has the potential to transform the student experience and create value for more young people. And then we'll invest directly in that idea with capital and with additional technical assistance and support to help grow it and get some of these new things off the ground.
So cool. So you've been at this since 2010. Rome was not built in a day. So talk to me a little bit about how the organization has evolved to this point now where, you're really kind of this juggernaut. I mean, it wasn't like this from day one. Right. I know this is a process. So talk a little bit about the process that got you where you are today.
Yeah. So I was hired in 2010 as the second employee of Colorado Succeeds and was told I had enough money for 3 months of salary from me.
Wow.
And I said, that sounds like fun. Let's do this. And so here I am 12 years later, and we've found a way to grow the mission and the impact. We started out very heavy on public policy and just being that voice for business.
Right.
And trying to bring advocacy to play, sort of change the way that people talk about this issue in the public domain. So that's where we started. But we quickly realized that, where we had previously thought the finish line was, the bill signing. It's a lot of fanfare. The governor's out there signing the bill, and, we give away the pens to all the people who worked on it. And, you pat yourself on the back. But we quickly realized that that's actually not the finish line. That's the starting block.
That's the start. Yeah, I was going to say that's step one, right?
Yeah, that's where the real work really begins. Yep. So all of the challenges that it took to get to that point really pale in comparison to how much work has to go into implementation, and particularly to do it with fidelity. And so that was the big evolution of the organization, was saying, we're going to go beyond just being a policy shop to one that provides technical assistance and implementation supports with partners to those people who are early adopters and want to take advantage of the conditions that have been put in place. So that's just where things have started to take off. And you start to see the champions for this work in the field are the ones who then spread it. And the word of mouth is contagious. And it starts to kind of snowball from there.
Right. It's kind of like that flywheel velocity. So I always preface this not with I know it's not a fair question, but do you have any favorite stories of success from your time? So I'll just caveat that to say, first off, my role in my responsibility in this role is, number one, to be a developer of leaders for the community. And so I feel like that first and foremost is what my biggest calling is. And so my favorite stories are the ones of people on our team who have achieved phenomenal personal and professional growth. And even if they've left the organization, they've gone on to progress in their career journey in other places, and they're leading other organizations. And so I kind of view that as, number one, that's my role, is to build leaders for the benefit of the community. And there's been tremendous success on that, and a lot of good people doing really good work. So that's a great mark of leadership.
Well, I'm just really fortunate to get to work with incredible people. I mean, my board of directors, they're astounding. I learned
powerhouse board. Yep.
And they've really invested in me. And so it's the least I can do to turn around and try to invest in others and pay it forward, so to speak. But one quick story I'll share, and this is a favorite of mine. We passed a policy called CDIP, a Career Development Incentive Program. We love our acronyms in education. What it does is it basically provides $1,000 bonus to a school if they help a young person get an industry certification that's aligned to a growing job in Colorado.
Wow.
And so business comes to the table every year and says, these are the growing jobs in our state. And then these are the industry certifications that young people could earn and then be relevant in those jobs.
Wow.
So we know that on an annual basis. All right. So then we go into implementation, and we're working in Salida, and the superintendent down there in Salida is just absolutely compelled by this idea and wants to build it and do some exciting things with it. And so he created a program down there where during young people's elective courses, they're building tiny homes on an actual job site that's situated in property that they own. So the kids so kids are learning. They're applying all these things that they're learning, whether it be in, algebra or geometry or physics. And what we found is the kids who are on these job sites are now seeing greater attendance in those other classes, algebra, geometry, and physics, because they know that they can't go work on the job site if they don't do well in those classes. Number two, they're actually speaking up in class more because they can talk to their peers about the application of how this matters in the real world. So their grades are going up, and then they're ended up graduating with higher marks than they would have prior to the program. But even what's more exciting than that is they're getting these industry certifications in the skilled trades, so they can take that with them anywhere they go. And they can do work over the summer and be employed. And it's a signal of readiness for the local construction community. And lastly, what I'll say is what's so exciting about this project in Salida is once the young people finish building the house, they take the keys of the house and they hand it over to one of their teachers.
Oh my gosh.
In Salida, they use this as part of their way to fill and support affordable housing, which is a major challenge in that community. And so they say, for any teacher who wants to come into Salida, and we can recruit you during the middle of this teacher shortage, we got your housing covered for you.
How about
that? By the way, your students did it. And the pride that they feel in that moment of being able to share that has been phenomenal. And not to mention the fact that they're getting to interact with other caring adults that they may not have otherwise seen before. So a lot of kids who previously had a dream of being a plumber, electrician, or drywaller now are seeing a superintendent and an architect, and they're saying, hold on, why do those guys get to go sit in the AC in the truck? I'm out here sweating. I want to go do what those guys do. And they're getting a bigger dream for their life. And many of them are choosing to go on to post-secondary where previously they didn't have that dream for themselves.
So I love that story because that's a big, giant concept that gets drilled all the way down to individual students. So that really is the dream in motion. But talk to me a little bit about, what are some bedrock leadership principles that you've leaned on in your time at Colorado Succeeds?
For us as a team, we've developed our core values, and for us, it's always leaning into those and having those to direct anything that we do. And so for us, we call them our clear core values. And so it's collaboration, leadership, it is entrepreneurialism, accountability, and a sense of relentlessness. And so these are the things that we bring to the work each and every day. And leadership might sound a little broad. And so if I could put a finer point on it, I'm sort of a student of Brene Brown, and I've gone through her Dare to Lead program. And I really look at leadership as like identifying potential in people, systems, or processes, and having the courage to develop that potential to its fullest possible state. And courage all comes back down to, are you willing to be vulnerable? Are you willing to be authentic? Are you willing to show up with a degree of humility and not pretend that you have all the answers or know everything, but really ask great questions? And that has been, I think, a bedrock principle for our organization as we try to get better is not thinking about how we come up with the best answers, but how we come up with the best questions so that we can really grapple with things that matter.
Well, and I think going back to what you said earlier, that it also takes a little bit of courage to have people work for you that might be smarter, might know more and everything else. But that's being vulnerable enough to say, hey, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I want you to be really smart on this, whatever that may be.
Absolutely. I was actually just talking to my board a couple hours ago about this. And my number one job is to hire people who are smarter than me.
Right.
And like, if I'm not doing that, then I'm not doing them the service that I need to be doing for the stewardship of this organization. And I fully expect the people around the table to all be smarter than me, which means I need to talk less and listen more. Right. The ratio is 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Yep. So I need to continue to be asking the right questions and pulling their expertise in. And again, that whole concept of they're closer to the problem, they're closer to the solution. So how do we really bring that into play?
Awesome. Well, it's no surprise to see how the organization has flourished with all these great values. So I'll wrap up. I've got a few left. The first one to change gears a little bit is, what is something you will listen to, read, or watch today?
Ooh, it's a great question. So I'm actually, it's not in my bag right now, but it was yesterday. And I'm reading this book around the 15 Commitments of Courageous Leadership. And just a phenomenal book. And it really goes through, I think, so many of the key pieces of where I try to draw my leadership mentalities and learnings from. And I hope to finish the book this weekend because I really want to enroll in one of their courses, which kind of takes you on a deeper dive into what that looks like in application. And so for me, I'll be crushing that book hopefully later this evening.
Well, salute, because with all the groups that you've got to deal with, you've got to take a lot of stuff into account. So who would you say has been a role model for you in your career or an inspiration?
Yeah, I would name a couple of people. First off is a gentleman named Zach Newmeyer. Zach is the co-founder of Sage Hospitality. He started that when he was, I think, 23. He's now, 63, and he's the chairman of the board. And
what a powerhouse that org is.
Well, exactly. They operate and own hotels all around the world. They've been able to weather a pandemic. They're incredibly strong when it comes to their community engagement. Yep. He's the founder of Colorado Succeeds and was the one who helped recruit me into this organization. Nice. And has just been a mentor for me every step of the way. I always tell someone, if there's only one person that I can talk to before any critical meeting, he's the guy I want on speed dial, because he's such a big thinker, a strategic thinker, but he also has such a degree of humility and just, I think, a really understanding, a strong understanding of, what his strengths are and what the strengths are in the people he's talking to, and how to try to translate where he sees opportunity and vision into where that other person could potentially maximize that. And so he's just been an amazing coach and partner every step of the way. I'm just so grateful to learn from him.
It's always cool to have people that you aspire to be like. And this is another one that's not fair, but outside of Colorado Succeeds, is there an organization out there that you really admire the work they're doing or want to give a shout out to? And knowing that you deal with 100 members, that's kind of like a Sophie's Choice question. So I'll give you a pass if you can't answer.
No, it's a great question. Let me just think for a second here. In terms of groups that I really admire, there tend to be ones that have extremely strong values and lean into those values. Maybe if I were to mention one, and this is one that I recently had the opportunity to go and be part of their leadership retreat recently. It's called Slalom. They're a consulting firm that is global, but they have a major presence in Colorado. And it's just rare to me to see companies of that size have such a strong commitment to the values of the organization and this fundamental belief in we're here to do well while doing good. And so they really do believe in community investment and change at a systemic level on issues that really matter to them. And so they've stepped up and have helped support us on the education side in really deep and meaningful ways. And they have a sense of urgency around the work that you don't oftentimes see in business, where it's not just about an urgency to grow and to turn quarterly profits. It's an urgency to drive impact at the system level, the state level, the community level. And I had a chance to see that in person when I went to their leadership retreat, and it was just completely inspiring to be around 1,000 of their leaders who are all fully dedicated to this.
Well, and then think of that, because you see a lot of different organizations, you're exposed to a lot of different things. The ones that are doing really well, especially today, coming out of the pandemic and all this other stuff, are those that are really driven by having an impact. They're not driven by, all the other stuff is almost a byproduct, the business success, but having the impact is really the driver.
Yeah. And I sense that from them. They all realize we're only here for a limited amount of time.
Right.
You can't take it with you. And so what's the legacy you're going to leave behind? And who are those individuals that are hopefully going to be able to find value in your wake or in that sphere of influence that you carry? And so it's just a breath of fresh air to be around those folks, but also at all the different companies that we get to work with. As you mentioned earlier, they're just very, very committed to the work and really passionate about leaving that legacy and building something for that next generation.
Well, if somebody's going to step up and work with you guys, they're obviously already pretty much there. So my last one will be, if somebody wants to get involved, learn more, where do they find you?
Yeah, so we're online, coloradosucceeds.org. We're also on LinkedIn. We're also on, all social media, Twitter. But please feel free to reach out directly to me. I'll provide my contact information here, or Jay, if you want to share it after the fact. But it's just first initial, last name, S. LaBand at coloradosucceeds.org, LABAND. Feel free to drop me a line if you want to talk more about how you can get engaged in the work. We'd be more than happy to think about all the different things that we're doing across the state and how people could jump into that and create real value for a lot of young people out there.
Fantastic. I'll put all that in the show notes with the contact info. Scott, keep up the great work. This has really been inspiring. I've got a lot out of it. I know the listeners have too. So thanks a ton.
It's been a privilege, and thank you. Really, really grateful for the opportunity, Jay. Thanks so much for what you do.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you're as excited to learn from Scott's insights as I was. This podcast has been brought to you by JC Charity and Event Services, where we help build great organizations. If you're interested in how I might be able to bolster your efforts and help your team achieve its goals, I'd love to have a conversation with you. You can find me at makingourworldbetter.com. To learn more about Colorado Succeeds and how you can get involved, visit their website at coloradosucceeds.org and find them on social media. Check the show notes for links, and if you enjoyed this podcast, we'd be grateful if you'd share it with a friend. Until next time, I hope you're inspired to find a way to make our world better.